Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Steve. Today I'm going to be by myself. I'll be with my brother shortly on our regular podcast, but I wanted to check in with something real fast with you. Have you ever experienced having somebody tell you all about a country or something that they know all this detail about it, but yet they never maybe even been there or lived there? I mean, not that that's necessarily necessary. That's pretty redundant, but in other words, what happened to spur my question on this is, I've been an expat living in Colombia now for 6 years. I don't live in an expat bubble of Medellin or maybe Cartagena or even the scant few there are in Bogota or, places like that. I live outside of a sort of larger version of that in the Eje Cafetero, the coffee region of Colombia. And so what happened was yesterday I saw a video from Matt Walsh. And he was talking about the origins of Native Americans in the United States, something about the true history of them. And so I started watching it. I hadn't seen Matt Walsh since his question a few years ago about what is a woman. I assume he's got that answered by now. But the point being, I was watching it, and all of a sudden he started talking about cannibalism, trying to, I guess, for whatever reason, documenting this as it was pertinent for whatever reason. So all of a sudden in the course of this, he mentioned two specific tribes in Colombia. And I was like, whoa, this entire thing has been about North America up until now, sort of this American look at it from the U.S. point of view. And when he did that, it almost felt personal. I was like, hey, man, why are you picking on me? And I was like, wait, not me. I'm an expat, but still, it felt weird. And, I'm really into military things still, being a United States Army veteran, and I pay attention to all this stuff. I'm well aware of what's going on with Colombia here as far as things going on in that regard. And something just clicked in that moment. And I said, I need to fact check Mr. Walsh on that. So I want to go through a little bit and talk about Matt Walsh's claim, and then talk about where Colombia is today, how they got to this point, and what it's been like living in this expat greater bubble of Eje Cafetero, where I'm surrounded exclusively by Colombians. I have not seen an American. I can't even remember. I guess it was a few months ago I went to an expat. The one time this year I've gone to an expat meetup, and maybe, chit chat for a minute, but I never see other Americans. I only see Colombians. And I'll get to that at the end when I talk about my experience. But first off, let's get to that claim about cannibalism. Now, of course, when you hear cannibalism, you think of people are eating other people. People are, in this instance, he's painting a picture of these indigenous tribes way back in the colonial days. And all of a sudden here these savages are sitting around a fire, chopping people up and munching on it. And that's not at all the case. What happened was, during the land grabs of this region, they were able to legally enslave any tribe that was accused of having this practice. And you can figure out what happens from here. You basically had two tribes in northern Colombia, one on today Venezuela border, the sort of Sierra Nevada range in Colombia, right up there with Santa Marta and all that, the tribe up there. And then to their west, you would have had in the Magdalena River Valley, which goes into Antioquia and all that stuff, Medellin, and that whole region up there in the northwestern part of the country in general. And you check the geography on this. Those two tribes were designated as being cannibalistic. Therefore, those tribes could be enslaved. Therefore, conquistador people, or whoever the settlers were, could do that. So you can see the monetary incentive to dub a tribe as cannibals. Now, who were these people? The ones in the northeast, the ones along the border up there in the Santa Marta area, the Sierra Nevada area of northeastern Colombia, northwestern Venezuela, they were just a very highly organized bunch. I mean, they were just, a little bit ahead. Nothing like maybe the Aztecs, what they found up there, but they were not as backwoods, as, for lack of a better words, as some tribes elsewhere. The ones to the west of them in the Magdalena River Valley, they were known for being particularly violent. And so when they fought hard. There's been no archaeological finds that suggest that they actually did cannibalistic behavior vis-a-vis finding damage on bones of being carved or cut in that way. It's very easy to figure this out. They've been doing it forever, all the way back to the Stone Age studies with archaeologists. There's been none of that actually documented. Right? And I'm just going to stay on this for a second before I get to where the rub and all this comes. There are documented times throughout Latin America and South America particularly, where when a loved one would die, they would actually take a piece of their flesh and eat it, and it would be some sort of ceremonial remembrance out of love. I mean, look, even in Catholic churches, they do something similar to that. I'm not trying to compare Christ to that, but you see where that logic might come in for a tribe that had never even encountered Christ, right? If you want to look at it like that. And so then you also have sometimes where they would take a piece of the flesh of an enemy and get their power from it. We're not doing it for dietary reasons. They were doing it for ceremonial, if they even did it, which there's really only stories of that happening. There's no archaeological proof. So how do these tribes become easily to be able to be designated as, well, the Muska tribe? This one I do know of because they are in the area where I currently am, just south of Antioquia in the coffee region today. The departments of Risaralda, Quindío, and Caldas, just above, south of here, Cali, which is Valle de Cauca. Anyway, so these folks were peaceful. And they did not like having the ones north of here, the ones that were really violent, so to speak, messing with them. And they had become friends with, guess who? The Spanish settlers, whatever they were, conquistadors. So obviously these folks in this area, they say, hey, these guys are bad guys. I'm not saying they set them up. I'm not remotely suggesting that, but I'm saying that there was also an incentive to help this crowd because this area is very fertile. It is today. It's the economic engine of Colombia, where all the big products as far as what you buy in your shelves come from, most of them anyway, avocados, plantains, bananas, all kinds of stuff like that. Coffee, the name of the region. So this is that area, those tribes. And then the Spanish, they designated that and boom. So that's where the historical record of cannibalism comes from, but it was not actually documented cannibalism. Be that as it may, the next item up for bids is, why is it that since 1810, 1812, when Colombia finally became the Republic of Colombia, or whenever around that time, when this happened, they immediately went into what was called the War of the Cousins. And this was a situation where, they were going back and forth, two halves, you could say. And then you went to the end of the century, to the end of the 1800s, you had the 1,000-Day War, which was from like 99 to 01 or something like that. And so they're fighting then. And then you had a period of just random local fights. Then the beginning of the Valencia or whatever, 60 years war. And then in the 80s, you had the addition of another front coming in with the narcos. And so who are these people arguing all along? All along, it's basically been left and right. Should we have official Catholic stuff, or should we have different rules on land or whatever, farmers type stuff, farmers business, the same kind of basic labor versus whatever. So it's a left, right in the ways that it was over the years. And so all throughout this, the names of the groups and faces of the groups have changed. They've all been Colombian faces, but they've always been arguing about the same thing. So they've never resolved this problem, and it goes on until today in 2026, despite the fact that after the end of the Civil War in 2016, when the FARC, which was an organization formed back in the 60s along with the ELN, when they became the guerrilla, so what happened? So they had farmers, basically peasants versus peasants all throughout this stuff. And then the introduction in the 60s was all of a sudden now you have guerrilla groups because of the way that they agreed to share power and blah, blah, blah. It's a long story politically there, but it added another dimension to who's fighting. So now you had two different guerrilla groups, which would be the ELN and the FARC, and then you had the army. And then rising up on the sort of right side was the farmers and things like that. They got tired of all this guerrilla stuff, and they informed what today are called the paramilitaries, so sort of the right group. And so you have all this going on at the same time. In the 80s, now enter in the narcos. You have Pablo Escobar and all them. So now you've got all kinds of people fighting from every direction. And so finally, the folks in Cali and the folks in Medellin are finally cleared out by the late 90s, mid 90s. And you still then have the fundamental left, right. Now it's down to just the paramilitaries and the U.S., and not the U.S., the paramilitaries and the Colombian military. Colombian military using the paramilitaries sometimes to do things that they can't do. And then you have the left, which is the FARC and ELN, and they fought all the way to 2016, but they never really laid it down. And today it's actually getting more fired up than ever. So that's been the case the entire time. So despite the fact that they weren't cannibals per se, they've obviously been, I heard it said one time that Colombians, they go to the ballot box on Sunday, and they go from ballots to bullets, ballots on Sundays to bullets on Mondays. And that's pretty much the way that it has been. And so as a result of this, two things have happened. One, I want to stay on the military thing for, and then the next one, I'm going to get to the good stuff so we can end this on a high note. So what happens next is that over the course of the last 25 years or so, maybe longer, Colombians that need a way out because there's not a lot of opportunity here. So you can go pick coffee or that for whatever, find a job for a few cents a day or whatever it might be. I don't literally mean cents, but you get my drift. Or since you've been in the Colombian military, you have 10 or 20 years perhaps of constant jungle warfare. And on top of that, since the 90s, Plan Colombia came in with the United States sending down special forces and things like that down here and Ranger to form the Lancero School. Well, I'll get to them in a second. The Lancero School. So you've got now battle-hardened troops that have had constant deployment, and also with the polish of first world special operators that they are trained. They go to the U.S. They go to the U.S. Army Ranger School. U.S. Army Ranger Schools come down here and they formed the Lancero School that I alluded to in a second. And it's just over the mountain from me in Tolima. And we've got them right here in town. We have a Lancero Battalion. And so they are the equivalent of the United States Army Rangers. The Rangers made the Lancero School. The Lanceros made the school even better. And now it's one of the most difficult schools in the world. And that's according to even special operators from the United States come down here. So Colombia has managed to produce now an influx of people that retire at say 40 or 30, depending on how old you were when you went in. And now you have no skills to go back to, but you can go to Ukraine and get paid $3,000 a month, or you can go to the UAE or someplace like that and guard oil wells and get $4,000 or $5,000 a month, which is unheard of cash in Colombia. I mean, the way that it is in the United States, it's like a 97% and lower is all the same. And there's very little thin sort of middle class and then the ultra elite. To get into that very little thin sort of middle class, which is basically the community I live in, you would have to have some kind of thing like that kind of a job to do that here, which would still be not as much. My point being, they can earn far more by doing that. So they do that. And right now, in the last 10 years, there's been over 10,000 documented Colombians that have gone off to fight around the world. You'll see videos on them. You can Google it in Ukraine. They've been down in South Africa and all across the place. I mean, they're guarding oil wells. They're doing all that stuff. Maybe not currently because of what's going on in Iran. But you get my drift. So on a side note, I will say, if you do, this is going to timestamp this for anybody watching it later. But at this moment, the country is in another volatile state where it's getting really heated. Those military people are almost exclusively right-leaning. And so they just passed a law in Colombia. The left president just passed a law this March saying that activity is illegal. And so that could present problems for them coming back to Colombia or even being here. Perhaps that's an insurance policy in case things get crazy, because all of a sudden, if you had 5,000 or 6,000 of the most battle-hardened troops in the world, and that's on anybody's list, coming back and being on the right side, it's an interesting little side political thing that's not being talked about here in Colombia. But the reason for that is we're going to get to, I think, right now, what the paradox in all this is, you hear things that have been popularized by like the Narcos series and other stuff. It always goes something like, God made Colombia the most beautiful place in the world and gave it the most dangerous men. And that actually, it's been Hollywood out there. You can see it. There's some really long versions of it, like literally from a book. I forget the guy's name, that Catching Pablo guy. He wrote it in there. That actually rises from a Colombia sort of sentiment, because they look around them. Like I'm literally looking outside my window right now at the Andes over coffee fields. It is absolutely stunning. This country is just gorgeously beautiful. I mean, it is literally an Eden. In fact, the airport is El Eden, which is Eden. I mean, it's just, this is, if there was, I tried to get religious here, but it's beautiful here. Yet, the friendly person you see today can easily flip, and they all know that. It's very, very, when it goes the other way, it turns into slaughters. If you go back and just look at some of the wars I'm talking about, you'll see 100,000, 250,000. I mean, it's brutal stuff, just brutal. And that's produced this whole thing. And so the way that they've gotten around this is, particularly here in Eje Cafetero, is they have I want to make sure I get the exact phrase right because it's Spanish. So formalismo formal is, like being very formal. And so formalismo is part of the reason that if you've heard me in other videos talking about being an expat here, you don't see people wearing fancy t-shirts supporting their local politician. You don't see a sign. You don't see a bumper. You don't hardly ever see a bumper sticker or anything like that in general, or a sign in the yard or anything like that. The thing here is that so long as you are nice, so long as you are open and friendly, the chances of things going sideways are greatly diminished. And when that part of Colombia is what you're experiencing, it is the most friendly place I've ever experienced. The people here are just an absolute delight. I mean, I feel like a jerk sometimes just being around them, and I'm not even doing anything. I'm like, I can't compare to the niceness of these people. They're just very nice, very nice. Part of that is by design, because you don't want to just start saying things. You don't know. You don't. And so to keep the peace, it's better to be formal. And that's where you get that Paisa friendliness. Paisa is the name of the people that come from Antioquia, Medellin, which are the original settlers of this area here. And so they all share the Paisa culture, and that's that ultra formalismo thing. And that's what you'll experience when people come down here and they say, oh, the people are so friendly. They are genuinely friendly, and they are absolutely being authentic in that, but it's also baked in. And that's why you hear me say before, one of the things I love about living in Colombia is that it does not matter what you've done before, who you are. The only thing that matters is what happens from this point going forward. And so I think I sort of figured that out without ever hearing this term, which I recently heard, formalismo, and that's why that is. And so that formalismo, I want to add one other thing here. Living here, I see U.S. men all the time on the news. Another guy was arrested in Medellin with 14-year-old girls. Joe Blow from Podunk, Idaho, and of course you go to Podunk, Idaho website, there's no mention of it. And we're of course not going to dox them or anything like that, but it's crazy how much of that goes on in Medellin in particular. And this sort of sex trafficking. It's not sex trafficking, excuse me, it's sex tourism. And it's frankly sick and pathetic. And even for the guys, they just threw this clown from the United States out of here. He's a dual citizen, U.S. and Russian. Anyway, they escorted him. It was on the news. They escorted him out. I watched it on the news because he had these like constant parties going at this place he had rented in Medellin. And there's videos of him on the porch. He's got his shirt off, he's like buff and all this stuff. He's got all these girls running around doing stuff. And not a good look when the only thing they see of America is that guy. So for the rest of us just walking down the street, people here know me. I know that they don't have that thought, but you never know. It's like, think of the United States. Whenever like they say, like, when you picture a Colombian, what do you picture? Do you picture Pablo or do you picture an actual human? Yeah, Pablo was a Colombian and that guy was an American, but I don't share any comment with him. And neither do neither do shit. You're talking about Pablo. There's not many people in the world that could do that, but you know what I'm saying here. And so, it's just so egregious to me that people treat Colombia like that and see it like that, and the way that it's sort of demonized, and the way that guys like Matt Walsh just go out there with an uneducated sort of Bush League history. Like, well, who is this guy? Just sort of, he got fancy for making some weird claim about what is a woman, trying to take on the trans thing because he can't wrap his head around it or whatever. And I'm not trying to defend that, but still, I thought it was cute. It was a cute little 15-minute pony trick. But now he's turned into a quasi-historian. I am a historian. I have a degree in United States history and also in Islamic studies, if you want to talk about it. But, and I'm not a pro, don't get me wrong. I haven't done that since I graduated. It's been a long time. But to hear this guy talk like that and to piece together scant information to build a case to try to make these people look like savages the way that he did in his video. And those savages are the ones that I'm living around right now, because these folks, they might have Spanish, they might speak Spanish, but most of them are very much indigenous American blood in there. Some of them probably not much Spanish, if at all. And so I took that personally for them. And so, it's coming down here and saying, hey man, I'm going to go to Medellin and I want to go on the Pablo Escobar tour. That'd be like a Colombian coming to Atlanta and saying, hey man, can you take me to a slave auction?